Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back after a long break to the Tip Sheet podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. Joining me after a week or two of feasting and relaxing and general, well, I say debauchery, but well-behaved debauchery, I suppose. My mates, Sixties and Clint. Fellas, the festive period is now behind us. How have you pulled up after Christmas, New Year's, and maybe anything in between and beyond?
Well, mate, before I go into myself, how's that ankle of yours going?
Oh, well, I've had a week of learning how interconnected the foot can be. So tendonitis in the Achilles resulted in a change of walking motion, which sprained another part of my foot, which is now sprained a different part of my foot. So we're getting there, but it's a lesson about taking care of your feet, I say.
It's for such a young bloke too, mate. I can imagine myself coming up with these sorts of tales, but a sprightly young bloke like yourself, it's terrible to be going through.
Born with short Achilles, unfortunately. So, unfortunately,
well, look,
not a Greek hero, but do have the Achilles problem.
Well, what I've been doing in this break, and I don't know whether this is something you fellas have had the opportunity to watch yet, but I've been binging Ted Lasso. Have either you fellas watched Ted Lasso?
Yep, seen Ted Lasso.
What a great show that is.
Absolutely hilarious and completely feel good.
Yeah, really, really enjoyable show. I never thought I'd be watching a show where soccer was the setting for the TV program and enjoying it as much as I am. But, it's good. And Yoko also seems to be enjoying it. So we've got something that we can watch in common, which is sports-based and a comedy, and we both enjoy it. So, it's highly recommended to any listeners out there. If you haven't watched it before, get on it. There's 3 seasons to catch up on. We're partway through season 2 at the moment. So, and how are you going, Clint?
Well, going back to the casualty ward theme, I'm fine, but my darling wife on Christmas Eve cut her finger open on a mandolin. And anyone
the death shredder.
That just makes me cringe.
God, that implement is so dangerous. Oh.
Yeah, very, very much so. And unfortunately, she learned the hard way, not using it, but drying it.
Oh my God!
So it was it was the first time she'd done, and she's never broken a bone, never so much as had anything other than just a graze. So it was her first experience in having any sort of real physical injury, and we spent Christmas Eve in the emergency ward, so that was an experience.
I assume most people know what a mandolin is, but for those that don't, it's essentially a giant shaving razor that lets you make super fine shavings of veggies or whatever you need to do. And
she'd been using it on a potato bake prior to drying it. So I
was thinking, how does a stringed instrument
the old
cause
Garrett blade? Yeah, she's got the Garrett blade strings. Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, look. It was an experience for her and her first ever stitches. So talking her through that, and likewise the subsequent treatment of that injury probably took up a lot of our attention throughout Christmas. And bless her, she was the reason in which it happens because she was cooking all the sides for her family on Christmas Eve. And as you'd imagine, going to the emergency room, we were naturally late to that event. But like a trooper, she pulled through, and we got through the Christmas festivities. And now she's going to have a nice little scar to tell the tale. And it's funny as we talk about shows there and comedies like Ted Lasso. I find, gents, whenever we're watching a thriller, and particularly one where there might be something with a serial killer or knives involved somewhat, my wife said to me, I always notice that you cringe at those moments in which a knife pierces skin. And I never quite got why you had that type of reaction. Now that this has happened to me, I think you have an underreaction to it.
Well, if there's a take for our listeners from our opening. It's get onto Ted Lasso and take care if you're using a mandolin.
And as we ring the
A
bell
bit
for
of good
the,
advice out there.
yeah, I think that's some sage advice there, mate. I was just going to say, as we ring the bell for the new year, all those New Year's resolutions and whatnot, one thing we always do, though, is shout out our sponsors of the show, Big Swing Golf, North Mead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan, and Parramatta. I mean, it's a new year, but they're still doing the same old amazing job for us. So thank you, fellas, for supporting the show, and let's get right into it.
News team, assemble!
Well, fellas, let's kick things off as usual with our Eels news. And of course, the main news for this week is it's the return to the training track up at Kellyville for the first grade squad. They commenced on Monday. I've got a training report that's up there on TCT right now for a few more details, but essentially you're looking at a reasonably light session on Monday, really just almost like the rolling the arm over in a game of cricket, just getting used to being back on the training track. Things picked up a little bit at today's session, a lot more conditioning work that was happening, a little bit more footy, and looking forward to Friday where the field session should kick up another gear as well. But of course, in conjunction with the return to training in the pre-season, the Eels have sent out an updated injury list. John, would you like to walk us through the injury list as it stands?
Yeah, so aside from the stuff that we mostly had a pretty good grip on, we know that Dejan Arce had a finger injury that was keeping him out sometime to the preseason. Ditto for Wiremu Greg, who had a foot injury. The King, Quinton Gufferson, his knee injury is still slated to be during the preseason sometime. And Makesi Makatoa, who injured his pec in the Pacific Nations tournament, is also slated to come back this preseason. They're the four top 30 players we already knew about. But then Arthur Miller-Stephen, he did his ACL last year. He's out for the season. And unfortunately, joining him with an ACL of his own is young Richard Penisini, who has done his knee and will be missing the entirety of this season until season. They've put him season 2025. That just means he's back for that preseason/season. So, big blow there for the Eels in regards to developing one of their premier outside backs there. Richard was fantastic in the action through the SG Ball and Jersey Flag last year. I get to say last year properly now without making a mistake. Last season, they're now in alignment. And yeah, that really sucks to see, guys, because Richard, not only is he an excellent talent on the football field, he's a fantastic young man, younger brother of Will. Big things were expected of him this year. Whether or not that meant an NRL debut or not, he was expected to make some serious developments through New South Wales Cup at the very least, and that's been denied.
Yeah, he's a different type of player to Will. Will is really that bullocking, chunky build at centre. Richard is taller. He's still got a strong frame, fast, but he could also play a bit of wing as well as centre. He was having a very good pre-season up until his injury just before Christmas. So that's a real shame that he misses an entire season of footy. So
the good news is that ACLs aren't the debilitating long-term injury they once were. So while it sucks to have him lose a year of progress now, it's not going to slow him down in the long term.
Yeah, well, he's got, at 18 years of age, he's got a lot of football ahead of him. So he turns 19 this year. But yeah, so he'll still be, probably effectively a teenager for a short time when he comes back at the beginning of next season. The other thing, too, is that the junior rep trials for this weekend against the Bulldogs have been shifted from Eric Tweedale Stadium to New Era Stadium at Cabramatta. It all kicks off at 9 o'clock with the Tarsha Gale, and then every 2 hours a match commences working through the kicks off with the Lisa Fiola Cup, not Tarsha Gale, and then it goes through Lisa Fiola, Harold Batts, SG Ball, with the matches kicking off at 2-hour intervals. So if you had planned to get to junior reps this weekend, make sure you're heading out to Cabramatta not Eric Tweedale Reserve at Granville. And, fellas, I think that pretty much wraps up what's happening at the Eels, unless there's anything you're aware that's cropped up in the last hour or two.
There was some, obviously we weren't recording, but there was some sad news over the break between the loss of Carl Webb, and Troy Dargan in different circumstances. So obviously our condolences to both families there. Webb spent one season with the Eels and Troy Dargan was a Parramatta junior. But aside from that, I think that's mostly the Parramatta news.
Yes, we put out our expression of sympathies in written form at the end of last season. But of course, from our podcast perspective, yes, thinking of the families there. Okay, John, it's the first one of the new season, but I'm curious as to what music you've got lined up for us for the interval.
Sometimes you set up those layups, in the show notes, and here's a nice little handoff, and sometimes it comes off unscripted. And you brought up Ted Lasso, and it's a bit of a loose connection here, but it's an Apple TV series, and I actually started watching another Apple TV series myself this week, Slow Horses, which is a British series starring anti-typecast Gary Oldman, one of the most versatile actors I think we've ever seen, and it's not MI6, but it is MI5, the internal department there, and sort of the creative juices started flowing. I was like, MI5, MI6, and I sort of came across another sort of soundtrack going back to my gaming roots that Clint might recognise here, and you might just recognise as well, Sixties, because it's a very iconic tune. Now, I think Clint might know what it is. Can you hazard a guess, not where it's from, but what it's based on, Sixties?
Oh, it's the James Bond thing.
Yes, good man.
Yeah, from Nintendo 64 GoldenEye.
Yes, indeed. One of the most outrageously good pause music soundtracks that's ever existed on an old console. So whoever made that did a banging job, and it's, classic.
One of the greatest video games ever created. If you were a kid in the 90s and you grew up playing GoldenEye, you had a great childhood.
Yeah, and where some of the sort of original Family Feuds came from gaming as well, about which weapon set to use, which map to go on, and what's fair. No Odd Job. You got to ban Odd Job. So, but yes.
Well, I can tell you, fellas, just keeping in that spy theme. We watched a couple of James Bond movies during the break, a couple of the more recent ones. I'm not really a huge James Bond fan. I'll put it out there. I wouldn't go and watch them in cinemas, but I don't mind watching them as a bit of home viewing. But following on from that, a music video came up for the song Secret Agent Man. Now, I think it's by Johnny Rivers, and it was a theme song for a 60s spy show, television show. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about this is it's an earworm for Yoko. She messaged me about it, just saying she couldn't get the song Secret Agent Man out of her head. And I had to make it a little bit worse by sending through part of the lyrics to the song.
Let's make sure
they've taken away your they've given you a number and taken away your name. I think that's the lyric from the song. So Secret Agent Man, good old 60s track if you like that. And the guitar riff is sort of fairly loosely based, I think, on the James Bond theme song. So there we go. Bit of a link there. Okay, fellas, we now launch into NRL news. And what would it be without the West Tigers featuring in the NRL news every week? First of all, a couple of things that came up during the break. We had Luai confirmed going to the Tigers. We've talked a bit about him in the past and the value of the long-term rich contract that he's on for the Tigers when he's probably not a confirmed playmaker, but he's going to be expected to take on a playmaker role. it looks like closer to reality, the swap that's going to get Justin Olam to the Tigers. But the other big news that came out today, I think it was, is that Scott Fulton has parted ways with the Tigers. Thoughts on that, fellas? Because his arrival caused a bit of consternation. And is it a case, do you think, of the new board cleaning out appointments that were deeply associated with the old board?
At the simplest level, I would say that's it. I think, at the most basic level, that would be it. Maybe they did an internal review and they weren't impressed by how he presented, perhaps, but at the most basic level, I don't think it's too much of an assumption to believe that they just wanted a clean house, fresh start, and Fulton came across as there was a lot of talk, like you said, Sixties, about the nature of the recruitment there and the sort of subterfuge between Manly and the Tigers there and whatnot, and so the Tigers get a chance to start clean there, and I can't really knock them on that decision. That seems like a sensible call.
Yeah, look, it's pretty common practice in all parts of business. The second a new CEO comes in, generally the first moves he makes within the first 3 months of being hired is to fire his COO and fire his CFO, because you need to have people that are making those big decisions within the club aligned to what you're doing. And it's not common that when there's a changing of a guard that there is that alignment. Normally they're part of the old think, if you want to quote unquote that, put that in inverted commas, I should say. So, it makes sense. And, I don't think that it would have been anything personal. I actually think that this is a case of what was reported, and both parties are saying, look, this is what it is. This is actually true and reflective of what happened.
Now, we're going to wrap up the signing and contract news with, first of all, Hoskinger's moving from the Panthers to the Raiders. Good pickup for the Raiders there, Clint.
Look, I think so. I mean, he's a handy player, and he's done well in his appearances in NRL thus far, but he hasn't established himself as a mainstay in first grade just yet. So he obviously gets the opportunity to do so down in Canberra. A 3-year deal gives him plenty of security as well, and that's pretty valuable to someone who's in his position. And having that longer term security, the opportunity to establish himself, he'll also have the opportunity to renegotiate his contract halfway through if he's killing it. If not, he's still got that security to keep his NRL dream alive. But he's probably a natural successor to a player like Elliot Whitehead, who's in his last year. They get a little bit of crossover this year in season 24, and the opportunity for him to establish himself as his successor is available to him if he's good enough to take it.
Yeah, sounds like the plan there. And John, a new NRLW coach for the Knights.
Yeah, which is a bit of a surprise, isn't it, given their success in the competition? So I'm not sure what the backstory there is as to why they would need a new coach. Did they get poached? Does anyone know why?
No, I'm not sure on that either.
Ben Jeffries has been announced. So yeah, I'm not really sure why. You got to imagine that their incumbent might have been poached, but yeah. So they've got a talented squad though. So whoever steps in is going to have the reins of a pretty handy unit there.
I could be mistaken, but I loosely recall reading that he may have transitioned to another role at the Knights.
That would make sense. So Ben Jeffrey steps in. He gets the reins to a premiership team. And you'd have to think that that's as good a first step as you can get in a coaching career. So be interesting to see what he can do there and how the Knights back it up with the best player.
Well, it might be a little bit of pressure. Might be a bit of pressure on
perhaps, yeah.
Like you're taking over a team that's
back-to-back premiership. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, if you don't go the three-peat, the team's gone backwards. So that's a tough ask, You don't win the title, you're gone. You're going backwards.
It is a double-edged blade, that's for sure. You get an incredible floor because you're getting a premiership winning team, but then again, the expectations are win another premiership. So
we're speaking about Ted Lasso and to many Australians soccer. To me, if you're a little bit more European inclined, call it football. The successor of the great Sir Alex Ferguson, the long-term manager of Manchester United, is what a follow-up act he had, and within I think it was within 7 months, he was moved on. So David Moyes, who's actually been a relatively successful manager in his own right and done quite decently at clubs like West Ham, where they won the Europa League last year. But it's a tough act to follow someone who's established themselves as a successful coach, no matter the sport. So yeah, I'll wait and see, I guess.
Well, quick question to you, Clint, as the football inverted commas.
It's hard for you to say it, isn't it?
Bloody
Yeah.
hooligan.
Well, I it is what it is. But as the football expert on this panel, what is the reasoning that they call their coaches managers rather than coach?
Look, I honestly couldn't say I know the exact reason why. I guess try and connect the dots and go. It's just a case of a different use of language, because all of the secondary staff, or the supporting staff, I should say, that exist under the manager, they do a lot of the face-to-face coaching, whereas the manager, or the gaffer as they're nicknamed in English football, or European football even, because their responsibilities exist not just simply as a head coach, they also have some administrative duties, and obviously they're very active in the player listing and the negotiations of what happens in the transfer list twice a year. It's not simply a case of they're turning up with a whistle and putting out some cones and saying, here's the drills you're running, and on game day they turn up in a suit. Not to say that other sports do that either, but there's that I guess that a little bit of British classism and prestige around the title of a manager versus a coach.
Okay. Now we'll wrap up the club scene by talking about what looks like a positional switch up at the Broncos, with Selwyn Cobbo rumoured to be moving to a spot in the centres. John, what's your take on that?
I mean, he is, immensely talented, massive athletic unit, so it's hard not to see it working. In saying that, the Broncos have a big void at centre with the loss of Herbie Farnworth to the Redcliffe Dolphins, or just the Dolphins. So there's no doubt that they're looking, and I know X Factor is a lame way of saying it, but just to replace that void and, fill the boots of a big playmaker like Herbie was for the Broncos. So it makes sense to test out how he can step in and handle those responsibilities. But at the same time, I'm a little bit ambivalent about it, because I think that a lot of, I don't know if it's teams or if it's just players themselves, it does feel like wing remains a criminally undervalued position in the NRL.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
Again, we've spoken about it in the past, but essentially outside of your spine, it's the position that handles the ball the most. You're doing you're diffusing kicks, you're doing kick returns, you're doing set starts, you're doing finishes. You're doing not just meat and potatoes, but starting sets and finishing sets. So I don't know.
And at centre, you're signing up for a far greater defensive
Yep.
responsibility and load.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I know the elite centers get paid a lot, and that's probably shy of obviously not having the fullback option available to him anymore at Brisbane. He views himself as potentially his best opportunity to increase his earning capacity. But if I'm a Broncos fan, I'm a little bit I'm cautiously optimistic, because I think on the attacking side of things it works. But if I'm an opposition coming up against Brisbane, and what Herbie played on the left edge, so he plays would defend outside of Ezra Mam, I'm kind of looking and going, you know what? Let's pepper these guys and see what they got, because I reckon we might have a bit more success trying to break through this side in 24 than we did this side in 23.
Yeah, it's interesting times ahead. It's, I look at those positions and I go, as you said, the running meters load for wingers is exceptionally high. It's not unusual for a winger to top the running meters for a match. And that's not through backing up a break to, have a long run and get some cheap meters that way. It's the workhorse sort of stuff
it's the donkey work.
Yeah, all those sort of dirty meters.
Yeah,
they're not
show ponies. Show ponies. They're cart horses. Like, they're doing the tough stuff.
Yeah, but at the same time, they're expected to do some of the show pony stuff,
At
like
the
some
other
of those spectacular dives into the corner. The athleticism that's required for that, the taking of the high ball. It's as you said, it's very much an undervalued position, and I wonder whether they are diminishing the strike that's there on the wing with Cobbo, and in attempting to cover a lost position, there may be weakening elsewhere. So anyway, we'll
it just kind of smells like, I was just going to add to finish here, it just kind of smells like they're analysing this from one side of the ledger, and they go like, oh, we've lost this really good, and I feel that Farnworth's defensive capabilities were underrated there, but we've lost this good attacking centre. Who's the next best attacker that we have on our books that we can replace him with? So when you played Origin, you're very capable. Let's put you there. As opposed to going, actually, we get a lot of value out of Selwyn carrying the ball as you both touched on, out of the deep end and finishing off backline movements there. It's like, are we weakening a strength here? Don't know if someone's asked that question there.
Yeah. Look, I think there's potential for that. Now, let's wrap things up with a bit of time on the Las Vegas experiment, because there's a bit of news that's been coming out about that recently. The first couple of pieces of news are really about the development aspect of the game over there. So, first of all, we've got news that there is a Vegas Nines that's happening on the 29th of February and the 1st of March. So that's before the double header. And the local teams over there are competing for, I think it's about $40,000 in prize money. So it's not like it's a rich tournament that they're entering in, but it is also that opportunity to showcase a form of rugby league to the public over there. It's evidently it's gone past 16 North American teams that have entered. There's talk that it may expand to some grassroots clubs from Australia, England, and South Africa. But just running through some of the clubs that have entered over there, you've got the Santa Rosa Dead Pelicans, who are the USARL champions. Dead Pelicans? Is that right?
Let me Google this.
I'm trying to put that one together.
Yeah.
Let me Google this. No, it's a real thing. Yeah.
Yeah, my goodness. People say the Eels is an unusual name for a rugby league team, but just going through that, with some of the other teams mentioned. So from Utah, there's the Provo Broncos, the Glendale Storm, the Herriman Roosters, the Riverton Seagulls, Canada's BC Bulldogs and Storm, the Ontario Ospreys and Toronto Saints. Look like competing as well. So it's giving an opportunity for the local players over there to travel to Vegas, get out there on the field, compete, put the game of rugby league again a little bit more into the headlines, but this time from a local perspective. And then importantly, that's being followed up by what they call a combine. And John, you might be able to talk us through that, because it's evidently it's an NFL terminology, but
athletic.
It's sort of like tryouts, I gather.
It's very compartmentalized tryouts. It's athletic testing. So in the NFL combine, which I imagine is the most analogous in terms of what they're going to be doing, you measure 40-yard dash with a 10-yard split. So that's roughly 36 meters, I think, in the metric system. So they'll do that. They will do horizontal and vertical leap explosive testing. So you jump up and hit the little rack thing that spins around to measure that, and then you'll do a horizontal leap across a measuring tape. They'll do some agility testing, shuttle drills, and free cone, So I think there's like a 10 meter or 20 meter shuttle. There's a free cone. There's a couple others, and then they do field drills, which aren't measured in terms of time or anything like that. But it's just the way for coaches to see it. And I imagine they're going to do something similar, but more specialised towards rugby league. So it'd be interesting to see what happens, because we don't have that in Australia. We don't do sort of prospective stuff in terms of ranking our rookies and creating a centralized list like baseball, or doing athletic testing the way that the NFL does for their prospects, where, obviously when you're trying to coach or develop a player, the actual ability to translate their athletic potential on the field is the most important thing. And there's guys that aren't necessarily incredible athletes that end up being fantastic footballers. Maybe someone like Jamie Lyon, comes to mind like that, where you look at Lyon, he wasn't, the most phenomenal athlete, but he was obviously a good athlete, but he transcended that and played incredible football. But on the flip side, sometimes there's a raw athletic prospect that just needs a bit of time to cook in the oven, a bit of time to develop, and that's what these combines are fantastic for, unearthing. And sometimes that it doesn't work out, but at the same time, sometimes you get a guy that's a freak and ends up being, a freak on the field as well. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens here, and how many, sort of American football college graduates or guys that couldn't make it in the NFL end up trying out, and if anyone catches the eye of any potential NRL or Super League scouts.
So they're talking about 25 male and 25 female athletes that are going to take part in it, and from that they'll offer 2 males and 2 females the potential to come, the opportunity to come and train with some NRL clubs and showcase their talents to the club at training. So interesting times. What do you? Let's have a little bit of a quick thought on this. What do you reckon the potential is for getting either an NRL or NRLW player out of the combine? I'll kick it off, and I'll say I think the first one that'll come through will be an NRLW player from it.
Yeah, I think it's more likely.
Agreed.
In NRLW.
Well,
I mean, the NRLW has already had a history of getting some cross-code players interested in the game, and I think that's where they're likely to be able to develop a gifted athlete, physically gifted athlete, and convert them to rugby league. So, and I mean, it might be something where, they're a couple of years in development to get to that stage where they debut. But I think that's where we'll see the first success story out of the combine. What about yourselves?
Yeah,
what do you think?
I think you're spot on. I think the NRLWs are more accepting and nurturing development sort of zone right now compared to the NRL, which is, obviously on the back of far more years of professional play, is way more aggressively streamlined and less forgiving when it comes to players with flaws, which is the reality of what an American prospect is going to have coming into or out of the combine into the NRL. So I think the NRLW makes a lot more sense for a prospective first up debutant. But in saying that, I think on the flip side, if we talk about athletic testing, we talk about that wing position. I think wing's probably the spot where you can go and take someone that is big, tall, fast, and say, okay, we can sort of work with that, and maybe it won't work this year or next year, but there's something there. So if someone really...
you took the words out of my mouth, John. I was going to say almost that verbatim.
But yeah, if you see someone that can fly like the wind and jump, 40 inches, as they like to do in the combine testing, obviously they measure everything in the imperial system. So for example, if someone had a 40-inch vertical or high 30s vertical, could broad jump 9.7 plus 10 feet plus, and had a very quick 40 time 10-yard split, then I think there'll be a few NRL teams that would say, okay, we might be able to take a punt here.
Yeah, Clint, anything more you want to add?
Yeah, look, it's hard to look past any position but wing really being the place for opportunity from the male side, for all the attribute reasons that John just stated, and it also respectfully, I mean, there's very respectfully to NRL wing is probably the position with the least learning curve for someone that's coming to the game new as an adult. Because you've got you think of other players in edge positions like second rowers and centers who have grown up running those lines, defending in those systems, are used to defending multiple systems. Halves is obviously very specialist, and I would say that you're absolutely more chance of striking it rich on the slot machines over in Vegas than finding someone at the combine that is going to be a potential half. Again, no disrespect intended there for anyone who might be a half trying out over there, but it's the players are just so established in the systems over here. Having played rugby league in those positions from 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age through to 15, 16, when they're first being scouted in the system and then further developing from there, they're just so far behind the 8 ball in that regard. Likewise with fullbacks and hookers for that same reason. Probably the next possible leap might be like a prop forward and someone who's sort of that rampaging runner, but you'd still have to teach them a hell of a lot defensively to get up to speed in rugby league, because fact of the matter is, by the time that they're teenagers, young adults, they're not playing both sides of the ball in football over there. They're either specialist attack or specialist defense players by that point. I know in the sort of the local competition systems before they end up in the school systems and the college system, that it's very common for players to play both sides of the ball at that age. But by the time that they're early teens, they're specialist attack or defense players. So you're having to teach someone who might be that type of, I guess, that prototype of player to play both sides of the system. And you kind of wonder if you're going to go down that path, is it worth the investment of putting that much time, money, and energy into someone to get them up to that speed, or if you've already got someone local who's gone through that and who's got much a lot less of a learning curve.
Yeah, my advice for anyone that over there that's trying out in these combines and is doing so as a wing is practice your passing from dummy half, because that is a skill that wingers have increasingly had to come to terms with over the years, from the old kick chase and the start of the early start of a set. If the halves or 5'8" hasn't got back there for a play the ball, it's the winger that's going to jump in. If the fullback's playing the ball, jump in and get that pass away from dummy half. But anyway, we now move on because, fellas, I was contacted by our good friend in America, Ron Greep, about a topic that he thought, well, he'd like to hear discussed on the podcast, and that was the confusion around rugby in the United States, because according to Ron, and I don't, and I would say this is probably 100% true, is that a lot of people in the United States don't realise that there is a difference between rugby union and rugby league. And when they hear the term National Rugby League, they are seeing it the same as National Football League, where league is like a generic term for the competition itself, not realising that it's in fact an entirely different code of football. And he's wondering whether it is important as part of this trip to ensure that the American public that get interested in this are also at the same time educated about the fact that rugby league is a different game to rugby union.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, as I said, this is coming from the perspective of an American supporter of the game, not someone who's a rusted-on rugby league fan who, in Australia, who might arc up at the
hackles raise and are you serious?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Like we normally get when you hear Victorians talk about.
Well, just wait. I was about to say, wait until you get the debate about Victorian football and rugby.
So, fellas, what do you think? Do you think should it be part of the goal of the trip there to educate that it's the name of the code, rugby league? Is it just a matter of this first time just get an interest in the product
I think,
and leave the education till later? What's your takes on that?
While obviously it is important to differentiate between rugby league and rugby union, I think in terms of branding, it's the NRL that is the most important thing from this trip, because you want them talking about the NRL, which, you know, National Rugby League, it does lend itself to that same issue, but when you start searching NRL, it's going to, you know, feed you right into the environment, the ecosystem of rugby league. And, you know, they're going to go to the NRL.com, you're going to go to the club websites, and you're going to be, you know, immersed in that sort of branch of footy. And look, it clearly is important. And if you're having conversational explanations in person, in terms of trying to relate that to them, you could talk about how American football and Canadian football are very similar, but they're also different. You know, they're ostensibly the same game with a lot of the same rules, but there are differences. And that's the same between rugby league and rugby union, where it's very much a similar game, but there are differences. And if you're having that conversation, that's completely different when you're just being, you know, across the table or in a bar trying to explain it. But I wouldn't be wasting resources saying, hey, we're not rugby union. I'd be going, no, we're the NRL, and let that sort of figure itself out.
Yeah, is the thought there as well that if you start talking about rugby union, you're giving rugby union a plug?
Yeah, exactly. It's
and clouding the waters a bit.
And it's a difficult thing too, because if you try and go hush-hush about it, you almost create a Streisand effect where people will start going, okay, well, what's rugby union? Why don't you want to talk about rugby union? So like I said, I think it's more about branding as the NRL, you know, as the Sydney Roosters, the Manly Seagulls, South Sydney, and who's the fourth team? Brisbane. So, and then again, that also raises its own problems, because you've got the Denver Broncos, the Brisbane Broncos, and, you know, I think some pretty liberally inspired branding that was borrowed, but that may be a good thing. Like that might actually be a, you know, a talking point in a positive way. It's like, oh yeah, you guys have got a Broncos too, and, you know, you've got Seagulls, we've got the Philly Eagles, who like to throw batteries at their centre. You know, that's a whole thing there. But yeah, look, like I said, for me, branding it as the NRL, not rugby league versus union, is probably the priority. I imagine it's going to be a conversation point at some point. They're going to have a segment where maybe they'll get Tom Brady in, or some celebrity, or, you know, Hugh Jackman or Russell Crowe, and they say, no, we're the 13-man code, and we do this and we do that. And it's probably just going to make a lot of people go, what are you talking about? Just only watch the sport. So, like I said, I wouldn't be belaboring the point.
Well, Clint, just to maybe kick it off still a little bit more, is that a lot of the early media that's happened, where we've had those players like Aaron Woods over there and having a bit of making an appearance at NFL games, is the word that is used is not NRL, it's rugby. So when they're talking about, you know, what's the difference between rugby and NFL, and they're asking those sorts of questions, or, you know, can you describe rugby to us? They're just using that term rugby. So is it then, you know, important for the players just to simply say, taking John's stance there, well, in the NRL, and then talk about that? Because at the moment it seems like they're ignoring the fact that they're using the term rugby and not doing any sort of correction on it. So all of the, well, I guess if you gave a sheet for the media to follow, almost like a tip sheet about what's happening, is, you know, maybe could you suggest to them that they don't use the word rugby, but rather use the word use the brand name of NRL? Would that be a positive?
And that would
Well, to answer your question there, Sixties. Firstly, I want to acknowledge my good mate John here and say you started the 2024 preseason in absolutely fine form, because I agree entirely with you. NRL branding should absolutely be the path and avenue that we're going down, and the use of you know, like differentiating the rugbies, or sort of doing that correction. You know, I think the way to address it, if you're going to address it, is to do it playfully. You know, to use the celebrities as John suggested. in the match programs that are actually shared at Allegiant Stadium when the games are being played there, you can have a page that, it's not a thesis by any stretch of the margin, but, it just has a little bit of detail about it. You can do playful things on social to say, what's rugby league, or when the history of rugby league, etc. And you can get around it that way without actually having to refer to rugby. Look, I think the players over there have just winged the media, to be perfectly honest, and they've stepped into the trap, because the local media there is of course going to naturally refer to it as rugby. They're not, and it's onerous on the NRL, who are having these players go out and be their spokespeople, to give them that directive. And they may very well have, and the players have made a mistake. I don't know, but whichever thing that's led to it, they have been using the terminology rugby. And I think that's a mistake. And I think getting too caught up in trying to correct it as well is also a mistake. I think that you can be informative in the right forms of media. And likewise, I think we should absolutely, as John suggested, be owning the NRL brand and getting that plastered everywhere, because that's what's going to be on the ball. That's what's going to be on the big screens at the stadium. It should be the vernacular that's being used by everyone as well.
And it resonates with the way they advertise too. It's the MLB, it's the NBA,
exactly
it's the
right.
NFL.
Exactly right.
Yes.
There's already something in their culture that I guess approves that. It's the easiest way to catch on. I think they're absolutely missing a trick by not doing that.
Well, I think to be fair, as you said, it's important to tackle it from the vernacular, because the advertising, the promotion is all using the terms NRL. The NRL's coming, all that sort of stuff. But it's when the discussion points are happening, when the media are covering and talking to people about it, where that terminology of rugby comes in. And yeah, look, I think it's important to be proactive in that regard. And rather than, as you suggested, rather than worrying about correcting them, informing them. And as I said, whatever media are involved in covering it over there, that there is an information sheet that's put out for the media, which can basically say, rugby union, the NRL is the game of rugby league, which is different to rugby union. They are two separate codes. And then, we will be using the terminology NRL throughout this promotion. And as simple as that, because this is our branding. It is both the name of the code and the name of our competition. Does
the code have a principal alcohol sponsor these days? I don't even know if they're allowed to, because it feels like they're missing a sort of a viral YouTube ad tie-in of the boys doing Aussie things like barbecuing and whatnot, and sort of in larrikin terms explaining
the
NRL
step into that identity.
Yeah. Like, in flip-flops and whatnot, and then, having a barbecue or shrimp on the barbie, as the Americans love to, use that turn of phrase, and explaining rugby league in bite-sized pieces. So, I don't know.
Well, I think for any of the major sponsors associated with rugby league, yes, there is a major opportunity there. And you'd also like to think that the 4 clubs that are over there, their media departments should be taking full advantage of this, like really just promoting the hell out of their involvement in it.
And while we're just on that, 60s, I might do a quick sidebar. I actually hate that the Brisbane Broncos have done a Vegas special jersey that isn't iconic with something that's synonymous with the branding of their club. I really think that in trying to be fancy and having their own marketable merchandise for their fans back home, they're potentially missing a trick in terms of brand identification and who they are over there, because you've noticed the other 3 clubs are going over with their primary/home jerseys over there. Big thumbs up and tick to that.
Yeah,
I don't understand why the Broncos haven't.
I think the only other acceptable jersey for mine would have been if you did a classic throwback.
Like a retro.
That's right. That's something that the Americans love as well. They love a good throwback jersey, but you're trying to get them to buy into your current, culture, your current identity. But yeah, that feels like a weird mistrick from the Broncos there. I agree.
That on top of the fact, you mentioned the likeliness to the Denver Broncos. Well, there'll be plenty of people who don't like the Denver Broncos and are already not excited about Brisbane in the first place. So, I don't know if they've necessarily thought that through in their marketing department. I think they thought they were onto something good, and they haven't quite fully baked that idea.
Yeah, there's so much to dive into with regard to this trip to Vegas, because we were looking at it from when it was first announced, just from that aspect of, this is all about the gambling dollar. And as we're getting closer to it, we're thinking more about the marketing of the game. We're thinking about the promotion of the game. It's and development. So it's interesting. Maybe because they've obviously set about a 5-year plan with this. Maybe it can lead to a little bit more than what some of us thought. Look, I'm hoping that it does provide that brand awareness in the market in America. I don't think they'll ever be, rugby league mad over there. But
how much?
But the soccer comparison in America is a good long-term goal for rugby league in America. Yeah. Getting to that standard, that should be something they're looking. Go, look, we're not going to be an NFL or an MLB or an NBA, but we can be an MLS.
Mm-hmm. How much would you be willing to I say sacrifice to offer up Sixties in order to grow the product there? Obviously, right now it's round 0, 2 games set before round 1. Would you do a full round, a magic round? Would you do state of origin, internationals? Like, where do you draw the line for trying to develop the code over in the States?
I'd probably draw the line at. I don't think I'd ever want a full round that's there. There will come a time when our club will go over and play a match there. I'm hoping it's not a home match, being as insular as I can be there.
That, gents,
surely the NRL would pay our expenses over there, right? 60s, surely.
I was about to say on that, when our time comes, are we all going, gents? Because I know for me it's a resounding yes. My wife's got family over there. It's a good excuse to get over to the States. I like visiting over there. John, I know it's pretty similar for you in that you don't need an excuse to get over there. But 60s, are we gonna get you? Are we going to get you across to the red, white, and blue of America?
I'm going to say that it'll end up being closer to the no. America's never been. It's never been on my bucket list for travel. I'm not really what you'd call a traveller. I've done a bit of the Pacific and other Australian states, but I haven't done Europe and I haven't done the United States. I think if I'm likely to do another country at some point, it's probably going to be more likely Europe before the United States. But you never know. You never know. I mean, the Eels might come to us and say, look, we can't do an American trip without the Cumberland Throw being part of it. Fellas, we'll
to be honest, that sounds like a likelihood. I think they need us.
A-listers.
We'll pay for all your expenses. We'll give you spending money on credit cards. The sky's the limit for your expenditure over there. Go over, have the time of your lives. Shit. Just give us a mention while you're there. I think that might change my mind.
Just pay us an exposure. Just pay us an exposure, please, TCT.
So look. It's, I don't like seeing any home games taken away from Parramatta. I'm a bit selfish in that regard. I think I think things like magic rounds and what have you are tremendous, as long as it doesn't involve taking away a Parramatta game.
You're not particularly strong feeling about State of Origin. Would you be willing to give up a State of Origin game or series?
Yeah. That's what I said. I got no dramas with Origin. I'd expand it to Origin, and I'd do that without even blinking, because that's where they can do a standalone Origin round.
Yeah, well, it's been spoken about, hasn't it? Like separating representative round from regular football. Well, here you go. Here's an opportunity. Yeah, and they could throw in the women's Origin as well, make it a double header in that regard, and maybe they could have like a
a grudge match between the two USARL grand finalists.
Yep, that's a good shout.
As like the curtain raiser for that, so they get the local exposure leading into.
One thing I would stress is that whatever is played, wherever it is played, it needs to be on a grass surface, because the AstroTurf will cause all sorts of issues for our athletes that are used to running on natural grass. Turf toe, all sorts of other things. The synthetic surfaces there, while they serve a purpose for the codes they're used for, they will not go well for our athletes.
Not at all.
Yeah, and I think that's important as well, that no matter how things are developed, expanded, that the welfare of the players has to be a priority with all of that. So,
agreed.
So, look, it's interesting times ahead for that. I do wish all the players well that are going over there. Let's hope that it is successful, because ultimately we're rugby league, NRL fans, and we love the game. We love supporting the game. Our main passion is obviously the Parramatta Eels, but we, as you know, as far as our competition is concerned, if you didn't have this competition, we wouldn't have the Parramatta Eels to follow. So we want the code, the competition to be successful, and we want the best for this venture in America.
Would you give a mandate to the referees, and I use this very carefully worded, but to referee as if it was a finals game more than an NRL game, in order to let the game flow a bit more, to not be bogged down by a lot of ruck stuff and whatnot?
We open a can of worms. I think we are opening a can of worms here, because the next round, when you're back in Australia,
I agree, but you want to give your best product, right? You want the game to flow, to go set for set.
Yep, I absolutely endorse it from that perspective, on the caveat that continues all the way through. So that way, it's the game officiated evenly throughout the season. But if you're going to nitpick on everything, then I feel as though, even though it's probably going to be in this scenario to the detriment of the product, you're going to have to be consistent with it, because the question of equity comes up and goes, we'll referee this way over in Vegas 14 days ago, and now we're copying this. What's doing?
That's fair.
John, my concern is referees are human, and whether there might be a natural inclination to keep it as simple as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I was hoping not to even discuss the word match officials or referees in looking at this game, but that's actually one of my concerns, is that it will be officiated differently, and I don't want it officiated differently, because as much as a free flowing game might be the best product, it doesn't necessarily give you the right result if you've got one team that, if it becomes obvious that the referees aren't going to pull things up. You know what players and coaches are like.
Oh yeah, give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Yeah, I mean they would, if it became obvious that was the edict, that then you can bet that the spectacle of the game is going to suffer, because you'd have one or both teams looking to push the boundaries, and it could get uglier rather than more attractive. So I'd hope that the NRL would stay away from anything like that in terms of
managing
suggestion.
The contest,
and I hope that the referees, the match officials, aren't overcome by the occasion in how they control the matches. I'm sure they won't be. I have all faith in match officials, gentlemen.
Is this a 2024 resolution?
No, I'm not going to say it's a resolution. Maybe this is always me deep down, a deep faith in match officials and referees. I believe in them. I believe that they will be close to perfect in this upcoming season. There you go. Okay, gents, I think this just about wraps things up for our very first podcast of 2024. We're probably not too far away from introducing the preview podcast because we'll have the junior rep season starting in February, and we'll have 4 matches. John, count them. 4 matches every week to preview and cover on TCT. I mean, we're talking about a huge, if they're all on the Saturday at the same venue, my goodness, talk about a marathon day at the football. And it will be a marathon doing previews of 4 grades of junior reps. So we may be very soon switching to the 2 podcasts per week to get our preview one in. And, of course, then when the season itself starts, we'll be back to the 3 podcasts a week and our home match appearances at Parramatta Leagues Club for the live podcast. So stand by for that and for news on that. In the meantime, gentlemen, our thanks again to our sponsors, Big Swing Golf at Northmead. Look, if you're going to get together with mates, work colleagues, whoever, family, you can host events down there, parties, all on these magnificent game simulators. So check out Big Swing Golf at Northmead. They are supporters of the Cumberland Throw. Get down there and enjoy the facilities they've got. Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Star Partners have been with us almost since the start of the Cumberland Throw. They've already indicated that they'll be back again for 2024. What can we say about Greg and his team at the 3 offices? They are the greatest loyal sponsors that you could any site could ever have. And Greg's already been in touch with me to say that they're backing up again for 2024. So thanks for that, Greg. So, fellas, and thank you for another fine podcast, both of you fellas. And as I always say, thank you to our listeners, and go you mighty Eels.